Daybreak on Biz News is proudly brought to you by Bonitas, the medical aid for South Africa.
Good morning and welcome to the Biz News Daybreak. Today is Thursday, the 18th of June. I'm Kerry Lanigan. Up first, let's get the latest overnight world news from our partners at Bloomberg.
President Trump has electronically signed an interim deal to end the war with Iran. Here is Trump speaking to reporters after dining with French President Emmanuel Macron at the Palace of Versailles.
Did you sign the MOU? It's signed. It's signed? You signed it in Versailles. I just signed it.
Iran's foreign ministry confirmed the signing by both sides, so this deal is now in effect. Pakistan was a mediator in this negotiating process, and tonight, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said Iran will instantly reopen the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. will immediately lift its blockade. Now, this agreement also includes Iran's potential access to a $300 billion development program and immediate sanctions waivers of Iranian crude oil. It does not restrict Iran's nuclear program. Discussions on that issue will be taking place over the next 60 days. Here is Bloomberg's John Harney.
The nuclear program is going to be negotiated, and we'll see what happens at the conclusion of those negotiations. Now, Iran has claimed all along that it does not seek to possess a nuclear weapon. Of course, there's been intelligence and various countries have said that that's exactly what they have been trying to do. So we'll see what happens, what the result of these negotiations will be.
That was Bloomberg's John Harney. The Fed's policy committee voted unanimously to leave interest rates unchanged today. The Fed funds rate was held steady in a range of 3.5% to 3.75%. And at the same time, officials signaled their next move may be to raise rates, not cut them, given the outlook for higher inflation. Here is Fed Chair Kevin Warsh at his first post-meeting news conference.
Persistently high prices are a burden for the American people. But the recent past need not be prologue. I am pleased to report that members of the FOMC are unambiguous and unanimous. This committee will deliver price stability.
Warsh arrived at the Fed last month promising change, and in his opening remarks he announced the creation of multiple task forces aimed at changing the way the Fed operates.
I'm appointing a task force in each of 5 areas that are central to the broad conduct of monetary policy. First, Fed communications. Second, the Fed's balance sheet. Third, our use and reliance on existing data sources. Fourth, productivity and jobs in an era of transformation. And last, the Fed's inflation frameworks.
Now, Warsh did rule out re-examining the Fed's 2% inflation target. In the wake of the Fed meeting, money markets have fully priced in a quarter-point Fed rate hike by November and another hike by March of next year. The equity market declined today in response to the Fed's hawkish message. We had the S&P 500 dropping 1.2%, and in the Treasury market, short-term yields spiked. The 2-year jumped 13 basis points, last quoted in New York at 4.18%. Shares in SpaceX dropped 5% today, falling for the first time since Friday's IPO. The stock is 42% above its IPO price of $135. SpaceX now has a market cap of some $2.52 trillion. That is lower than Amazon's.
John Steenhuisen has been removed as Minister of Agriculture. Biz News editor Alec Hogg looks at how it came to this and what it tells us about the new DA leader, Geordin Hill-Lewis.
There's a document sitting in Cyril Ramaphosa's in-tray this morning that will make for very uncomfortable reading for one man. A man I've known for some years. A man of genuine personal warmth and political courage who, for reasons that are now painfully clear, found himself in entirely the wrong job at entirely the wrong moment. That letter, written by new DA leader Geordin Hill-Lewis, politely asks the president to remove John Steenhuisen from the cabinet and as his position of Minister of Agriculture, and to reassign him to the considerably more junior role of Deputy Minister of Trade. It is, in the driest possible understatement, a demotion. First, let's ask, how did it come to this? South African farming is, among other things, one of the few sectors where the country genuinely punches above its weight on global export markets. But here's the thing about the agriculture brief that I suspect nobody in the DA's leadership circle fully appreciated. It's not a policy portfolio. It's an operational one. Farmers don't want speeches. They don't want parliamentary eloquence. They want someone who understands that when your cattle are dying, every hour of delay is money, real money, livelihoods, generations of breeding stock gone. Agriculture is a ministry that rewards practical, no-nonsense executive management. And John Steenhuisen, for all his many talents as a parliamentary operator and party leader, was not that man. I think of what Warren Buffett calls the circle of competence. The principle is elegantly simple. Know what you know, don't stray outside of it. Steenhuisen's circle of competence was politics, opposition politics, parliamentary tactics, party management, the cut and thrust of the chamber. Agriculture was outside that circle, and the moment the crisis hit, it showed. I don't want to be entirely unkind to John Steenhuisen. He did do some things well in that portfolio. He opened new market access opportunities for South African agricultural exports. He made progress in the procurement and distribution of vaccines. And we should remember that he inherited a deeply dysfunctional department. The ANC had hollowed out Onderstepoort's vaccine production capacity over many years. But the FMD crisis exposed something fundamental. When you're the Minister of Agriculture and a national livestock disease emergency breaks out, your job is not to protect bureaucratic turf. Your job is to stop the disease by any legal means available, as far as possible. The state didn't have that capacity. The private sector did. The legal correct answer was obvious. But Steenhuisen chose the politically comfortable one instead. Centralized control, the illusion of state authority. Perhaps he agreed on this with his colleagues from the ANC in the cabinet. But the farmers paid for it. Now to the more interesting question. What does Geordin Hill-Lewis's decision tell us about his leadership? What strikes me most about how Hill-Lewis has handled this is the balance he's struck. He hasn't thrown Steenhuisen to the wolves. He hasn't issued a public statement laced with criticism. His formal announcement this morning was careful. It acknowledged Steenhuisen's achievements, credited him with market access work, and framed the change as a careful assessment of the team's contribution to the government of national unity. So Steenhuisen's being moved to trade and industry. A good decision. It's a portfolio where his political skills, his knowledge of business sentiment, his relationships with industry are actually applicable. Hill-Lewis is not destroying him, he's redeploying him. Demoting, yes, but he's not throwing him under the bus. And crucially, Steenhuisen is being replaced with Willie Okamp, a farmer, an actual farmer, someone who's spent his life understanding the rhythms of the land, the economics of livestock, the practical realities of what a disease outbreak means in concrete terms.
SpaceX has listed at a valuation above $2 trillion, the biggest IPO in market history, with the smallest float. Cy Jacobs breaks down whether this is a genuine business story or something else entirely. Watch the full interview on biznews.com.
The business has exciting one-off opportunities that nobody else has, But does that materialize into profit? Not necessarily. It hasn't in the past. Yes, they have one very good business, Starlink. But if you had to value Starlink and even give it the most absurd multiple, you wouldn't get to probably 20 or 30% of SpaceX's value. Then you've got this whole XAR Grok, which was the roll-up of all the the data businesses and AR together with the old Twitter, which is X, which was really, really struggling, but got rolled into SpaceX just before the listing, at almost $250 billion. And you add that as well to the rocket launch business, which, yes, is exciting and fun and, has contracts with government and has contracts with corporates, etc., but has never made money. It's very expensive. Rocket fires, go wrong, etc. Is that a business you really want to invest in for return? So, this is 3 big businesses together. The only thing I would say to you is, would I short it? Definitely not, because the market structure doesn't allow it. In fact, this could go just like SpaceX rockets. This could go to the moon, because options, for example, started trading yesterday for the first time on SpaceX. The volume was so big that 60% of the IPO stock traded again yesterday in the market, which is crazy. I give you some interesting things as well. All the various disciplines for this listing were put in place before so intelligently. So, for example, if you were a client at Fidelity or Robinhood or Sophie or E-Trade, you were actually warned that if you flipped the stock, you would not get any other further IPOs. And we know we've got some great IPOs like Anthropic and OpenAI that may be knocking on the door. So you were actually warned that if you were given stock, you were not, in fact, allowed to sell it, which I find, and this is the largest IPO that's ever happened in the history of the market, but at the same time, the tiniest float that's ever happened. So, I'm not sure how this was, to be honest, allowed to happen. Why is America not stopping it? Because everybody's incentivized by it. There have been multiple raisings of equity over the years, and nobody's really lost out here. This is money created out of nothing. If you can sell some of your shares at a 2.3 or 2.4 trillion valuation, this is a get-rich scheme that obviously is mostly going to Musk, but is also going to a lot of corporate America, a lot of very high net worth individuals who are very connected in the private equity and pre-IPO space. And, it's a get-rich scheme. And, a lot of retail jumped on board, on the IPO on the day of the listing, but really that's just because of the hype, and that's a very small component of who owns SpaceX.
Healthcare matters, but what matters most?
Having cover for the people who keep this business going.
Bonitas is there for you when it counts. Bonitas, medical aid for South Africa. Visit bonitas.co.za and find your plan.
The outgoing Western Cape Police Commissioner has come out in support of extending policing powers to the province. Solly Moeng unpacks what's changed and what it means for the DA. The full interview is on biznews.com.
In the Western Cape, the outgoing Police Commissioner supporting extending policing powers to the province.
Yeah. Look, I interviewed J.P. Leroux from Switzerland about 3 years ago on this topic before the elections. And it's been going on for years. The DA in the province has been asking the national government, at the time they used the word devolution, to devolve some of the policing powers, at least to enable the province to take care of the rampant criminality, especially gang violence, drugs, and the stuff that we see in the streets of some of the poorest areas in the Cape. For years, the ANC has not been wanting to do this, and the political interpretation of it is that, well, the ANC wants the DA to fail. The ANC cannot afford to see the DA succeeding where the DA fails elsewhere. And anyway, it's a great thing for the ANC to use as a political a weapon against the DA ahead of elections, that it's failing to drop the levels of violence in the Western Cape. Now, this man, maybe, I don't know if it's Madlanga Commission inspired, he's suddenly saying, okay, let's not go the devolution way, which is a political decision, right, which would require votes in the National Assembly, saying, let's allow them to do certain things that will help the national police. And he's absolutely correct. That will help the national police also, focus its resources elsewhere and let them do some of the things they want to do, crime investigation and preparation of dockets, making sure these dockets end up with the prosecution's authority in a very firm presentation, not in ways that end up being thrown out of court because the shoddy work was done out of them. I think it's a good thing. I think it serves two purposes. One, the DA will be able, and the mayor has already said, thank you, this is what we've been asking for. But it also means the DA cannot continue making excuses. I'm not saying it's been, but it's been on solid ground. Now it has the opportunity to show what it can do when it has the power that it has been asking for.
And finally, South Africa sits on the world's largest remaining gold endowment. So why is Australia spending 70 times more exploring for gold than we are? The BizNews Daily Edge digs into Dr. Duarte de Silva's latest research.
Start with just one number, just one. 738 million rand. That's what South Africa spent last year exploring for gold. On the world's largest remaining gold endowment, in the best gold price environment that modern history has produced. Australia spent 70 times more on geology that's a fraction as prospective. In other words, we have so much better opportunity here to find meaningful gold deposits than Australia. And yet they're spending 70 times more than we are to try and bring it to account or find something that they can mine. Canada spent 50 times more. The United States, 30 times more. But just stay with Australia, 70-1. That's not a market outcome, that's a verdict. Now here's what makes this breathtaking. The Witwatersrand Basin, the same geological system that produced 40% of all the gold ever mined in human history. Let that sink in. Almost half of all the gold that exists in the world came from the Wits Basin. And it still contains, at documented minimum, what it's already given up. At a minimum, because the deeper you go in the Wits Basin, the more gold you find. And as you get better technology, it enables you to mine deeper. You've got all this gold just sitting there at depths we never fully explored, because back then the gold price didn't justify it, but it justifies it now. Gold above $4,000 an ounce, having just bumped up again after the Middle East peace deal to around 4,300. The gold supply pipeline is empty. In other words, the rest of the world ain't got no gold. It's all sitting here in the Wits Basin. New discoveries elsewhere in the planet have been shrinking for 30 years. Mine supply has been essentially flat since 2018, despite the price having doubled. And this being the world, pretty much everywhere else in the world, when the price goes up, people go and look for more of the stuff whose price is up. Not in South Africa. But there's no discoveries happening elsewhere. Here, where we're sitting on the most significant remaining endowment on Earth, we spend less on exploring it than a mid-tier Australian company spends on a single district.
That's it for today's BizNews Daybreak. I'm Kerry Lanigan. Thanks for listening.
Daybreak on BizNews is proudly brought to you by Bonitas, the medical aid for South Africa.